When you hear the word implementation, I bet you feel a sense of dread, maybe some anxiety, as implementations in the past have not gone as smoothly or have taken way too long. Well, today we are here to change that, because no longer should implementations invoke fear or anxiety. They should be something everyone looks forward to. The dawn of a new day that promises efficiencies, more time to think creatively and strategically, but most of all, a sense of innovation and moving into the future. Today, I am joined by Jeremy Hudson of Open Sky Group to walk us through what a true successful software implementation should look like. And so over the next 5 episodes, we will break down the steps of what you need to know so your current or next supply chain technology implementation can bring your people together versus tearing them apart. First, we start with change management and how this is a skill every leader should learn and practice. So welcome, Jeremy. Why don't we get started with the background on Open Sky Group and why you are leaders in technology implementation?
Open Sky Group is a global JDA specialist. We implement warehouse management, labor management, workforce management, and transportation management solutions within the supply chain. Really, we started about 13 years ago, and what we were then is a little bit different than what we are now. Back in the day, if you think about supply chain software 13 years ago, it was very much a build-to-suit type of technology. Companies would come in, they would build a very specific code base for a company, and they would have to maintain that WMS over time. Ultimately, we saw where this was hurting companies, and so did the software providers. And so since then, the software has evolved. Open Sky saw this as an opportunity to also evolve. So what we did is about 4 years ago, we introduced a paradigm shift in terms of how we implemented. We took more of a disciplined, agile approach to the way that we implement software, and we're starting to see great results from that. And so now we're seeing companies implement in a much more shorter period of time. What we're also seeing is the ability to go live much more frequently. And so, for example, this year alone, we had a streak of about 15 weeks where we saw 18 go lives within that period of time. And we think that's a direct result of the change in the approaches we're taking to implementations. And so we're very proud of that. And we continue to see the successes of implementing software successfully.
Great. Well, before we do a deep dive into a successful implementation, I want to talk about change management because I think that it's a big topic and something that's really going to drive a successful implementation. So what exactly is change management?
I think when folks hear change management, they immediately think of human resources and flyers on a bulletin board. They're thinking it's human resources centric kind of operation, but truthfully, where we see change management done right is when it's done not in parallel to a project, but when it's entrenched in the project itself. And so I like to see when human resources are involved from the very beginning. I like to have my human resources team kind of in that implementation design session. They need to understand from the very beginning what's going to change, what's going to be the largest impact of change. And I like really talking about those topics from the beginning. So for example, what terminology are you most likely to see change? And so what you may call one thing today might change in the future. Let's start to call those out early. Let's get those folks involved. Let's get them involved in the conversations. And then that allows us to truthfully kind of carry that forward into the project. So here's the thing, supply chain's changing rapidly. We're seeing that. We're seeing that suddenly jobs are going to change with the implementations of this software. So human resources is able to get involved. Those folks that are managing that change are able to get involved. And what they're going to do with that is they're going to be able to really focus on whose jobs are changing the most and how we can handle that throughout the course of an implementation.
So then why is it so important for leaders to really embrace change management for the future of their careers as well as the business?
Sure. So my advice to leaders is don't simply focus on making a great tool. Simply providing a great tool or producing a great tool isn't necessarily what you're focused on with change management. Truthfully, that tool is only as valuable as you empower users to use it. And so simply providing a well-developed, a well-configured tool isn't necessarily going to provide your business the end solution they're looking for. You have to empower those users. And so it's not simply about building a great tool for months and months of a project, but also making sure that you've given users the ability to wield that tool correctly. And so I would advise leaders out there that are embarking upon a project such as this to not just focus on building that tool, but also understand throughout the entire project how folks are going to be using that tool and how they need to be empowered to do so.
You might be wondering why or how change management correlates to implementation. Well, it has a huge impact. So let's share with the audience some key components to that. What would be the top 3 things as a part of a change management strategy that leaders, maybe companies and businesses, should be focusing on?
Sure. I think it boils down to understanding, inclusion, and awareness. I think if you think about that, understanding, for example, you're going to want to make sure people understand why you're making this change. Software implementation is a drastic change to a lot of people. This isn't a system that only a few people are handling. A lot of people will see the impacts of this implementation. And I think understanding why you're changing, understanding what you're going to improve, and why a role may change is very important to those that are going to be impacted. I think also inclusion. I think that a lot of times change is rejected not because it's bad, but simply because people don't feel like they had a say. They don't feel like they had a true idea of why something was changing. And I think giving them that inclusion in that process, one thing I learned is when we implement a software, many times the leaders think they know exactly how something works in a building, and that's not necessarily the case. I can't tell you how many times we've gone through a design session, we've gone through a proof of concept session, and then suddenly learn that, wait a second, what you told me was happening isn't necessarily what we're seeing happen out there on the floor. And it's because we didn't include the users that are actually performing the job. I think inclusion helps everybody. It helps the leaders understand what's truly happening, what can be improved. And I think it helps those that are doing the job understand what's going to change for them and why. And then lastly, awareness. I like to divide this into 3 different groups. So when I talk about awareness, I like to think about those who will hear about the software change. Think of your customers. Think of those that might see the end result. And then you also have those that see the software that don't necessarily interact with it, but they're going to see the results of it. So your customer service representatives, things of that sort, your sales team. And then finally, you have those that will use the software. And if you treat each one of those groups separately, it's going to be a different level of change management for each. And so I think approaching it in that way is best. So again, it's going to be understanding, inclusion, and awareness.
Now that we have learned about change management, why it is important, and the top 3 things to have in your change management strategy for a successful implementation, next we will dive into the importance of working with the right software provider and key questions to ask along the way.